why don't we go ahead and get started? And I'd like for us to do something for Marlene and I's sake to get started off, because we feel a little insecure about not really knowing everybody's names. And some of you who we've known for 25 years and we don't know your name either. And so
Around.
it just kind of it works that way. So if we could just very quickly, we're just going to go through the room really quick. The husband or wife could do this, but share your name for both of you, how long you've been married, and what your family situation is. Do you have 19 children? And give us all their names.
The Partridges aren't here right now.
The Partridges aren't here. That's why I know I'm safe, okay? So let's start right over here with the Vogels, and we'll just kind of move that way.
All right,
Okay.
so I'm Vince, so this is Julie Vogel, and
You'll have to speak loudly. Some of us.
for those of us hard to hear, I'm Vince, this is Julie Vogel, and second question was,
How long have you been married?
we've been married since 2001.
However many years
15 years.
It's okay, bro. I'm with you, baby.
We have 2 children,
And they are
19 and 13.
holy nice. All right.
All right. I'm Mike. This is Rochelle Clemens. Been married almost 17 years in September. And we have 2 kids, 16 and 12.
16 and 12. I need a chair. Get myself a chair. All right. I'm sorry. Back next row.
I'm Michelle. Come on, my lovely husband, John. We've been married 16 years. We have 5 kids. Woo! 21, 15, 12, and twins who are 8.
Oh, you will be teaching tonight.
Yes.
All right. Let's move to the front row. We'll have to zip pretty quickly here because we have a lot to do tonight.
I'm Rebecca Wallish. My husband's on his way. We've been married 20 years, and we have 2 boys, 18 and 15.
Okay.
Todd and Sharon Gilmore, we've been married 25 years.
Woohoo!
I'm the only one that's excited about that?
Thank you, Carl.
Come on. You guys don't know Todd and Sharon. Come on.
We have a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old and my elderly mother living with us.
Okay, apparently you two don't sit together, but go ahead and go anyway.
There was no room.
So I have the half of Carl. I'm Kim, and we've been married 20 years next week. We'll be married 20 years. And then we have 3 boys everyone knows.
I'm Scooter, this is Biffy. I'm Ray and Lisa. We married almost 30 years, 29 years, 3 kids, 27, 28, 24 and 21.
Very good.
Wow. We're Chad and Valerie. Next month will be 20 years of marriage. We have 2 daughters. Taylor will be 16 next month, and Ryan will be 13. So, yeah.
Okay, so Greg is in another class tonight, but we've been married, it'll be 39 years in 4 days.
Wow.
We have 3 married daughters, and my mother lives with us. And we have 1 beautiful, perfect that's 2 years old.
So Eric and Jenna Early, we've been married 20 years, and have Cameron who is almost 15 and Connor who's 12.
Okay.
Well, we're John and Joyce. We've been married 33 years. We have 2 children, an almost 30-year-old in a couple weeks, a 26-year-old, boy and girl, and we have a daughter-in-law as well, and we have a brand new grand dog who we haven't met yet.
We're Doug and Sally. We've been married 49 years. We have 2 sons. We don't even know how old they are.
You're allowed at 49.
We're Scott and Susan Connor. We've been married for 24 years. We have a 19-year-old and almost 30. Wow. This is Dave and Kristen Howell. We've been married 15 years. We have an 18-year-old and we have a 14-year-old.
Good timing.
We've been married 16 years.
16 awesome years.
Come on.
We have a 15 and a 14.
We're Kyle and Shauna Fowler. We will be married 12 years next month. We have an 8-year-old boy, a 5-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old daughter.
Awesome.
Chris and Allison Jacobs. We've been married 33 years.
Wow.
And we have, I know we have 3 kids, and their ages are.
51, 29, and 23.
Good job, Allison.
Good job.
Just make them
I'm Leslie Host, and my husband Joe. We lost a child for a while.
Great.
We found him. So we've been married 20 years, and we have a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old daughter.
Wow.
We are Hester and Ben. We have been married for 10 years. We have a 3-year-old one girl, Grace. She's the popular one.
All right. I think we have one couple left here.
Chris and Jasmine Lee Scarlett. We've been married for a year, June 5th.
Woo!
We have a almost 2-year-old little boy.
Awesome.
And Jim and Marlene, we've been married 25 years tomorrow. We have a 19-year-old and a 14-year-old daughters. I have to tell you, first of all, we're honored to be able to teach part of, but I would tell you that we are going to be coordinating this class, and that we're not going to teach all of them. And there will be weeks that actually we're not here as well. So my schedule doesn't always have me in Colorado. And if I do come off a little loopy tonight, I just got back from Tokyo about 4 or 5 hours ago, and I'm a little, all right, a little dingy at the moment, but for most of you, you won't notice much difference. The cover story on Time Magazine this week is how to stay married and why. It's an interesting, I literally, I just picked this up when I walked in the house. It was laying on the counter. Christina decided that she needed a Time Magazine subscription, and so we have one now. Yes, in all of her 14 years. It says, in the early years, you fight because you don't understand each other, and in the later years, you fight because you do understand. I would say that's a fairly accurate statement, is it not? Okay, so for those of you who are younger marrieds, I just want you to know that the motivation for the fight will change, but the fight will remain. It says at the same time, new evidence keeps piling up that few things are as good for life, limb, and liquidity, that means your finances, as staying married. A Couples who've made it all the way later into life have found it to be a peak experience, a sublime experience together, says Carl Pillemer, a Cornell University gerontologist, who did an intensive study of 700 elderly people for his book, 30 Lessons for Loving. Everybody, 100% said at one point in the interviews that the long marriage was the best thing in their life. But all of them also said that marriage was really hard. Others said it was really, really hard. I quote. You know, the challenge with marriage for all of us is relatively simple. You and I are wired quite similarly to little babies. If you point at what you want a little baby to look at, what will the baby look at? Your finger. Life and marriage is designed to point us toward God. But we wind up staring at the finger far too often. And I will tell you this, as counterintuitive as it may seem, focusing on your marriage is probably the wrong thing to say at the beginning of a class like this. Focusing on your marriage almost certainly will lead to major knockdown, drag-out fights. It's a weird thing. Why in the world would we be wired in such a way that the thing that we focus on, usually we wind up fussing over? Well, the reality of it is that a great marriage, not at all unlike happiness, is a byproduct of something else. And chasing after the thing that you want, which is the byproduct, will usually lead to a lot of pain and suffering for you. And I can tell you that all of us have had the experience that says we fuss less when we have a common focus other than each other. I give you a very unusual example of this. You all remember during the first Bush administration, the father, not the son, Saddam Hussein, in a moment of boredom one day, decided that he would like to attack his little neighbor Kuwait. So with no provocation whatsoever, he mobilized his troops, they moved to the south, and they attacked Kuwait. Now, Kuwait's a tiny little nation, it doesn't have many defenses. Its biggest asset is shopping malls. And so when they attacked, it kind of infuriated the rest of the world. And a coalition was created of nations that previously had only fought with each other. And so you had the Soviet Union in this coalition, or Russia at that point in time. It was right after obviously after the fall. You had Saudi Arabia. You had Israel. You had all of these countries that typically never got along with each other, and they all coalesced around one thing. They had a common purpose, and that was to keep this knucklehead from running through the middle of the Middle East and honestly disrupting the world's oil supply. Now, you say, what does that have to do with my marriage? It has one very important thing to do with your marriage. When you and I have a common focus other than each other and other than our happiness, we tend to be much more at peace, we tend to have a much better relationship, and we tend to behave ourselves very differently than we do otherwise because our focus is not on ourselves. And so this class is a very unusual class in that it is designed for us to figure out what is the purpose of our marriage. There's a big spike in the divorce rates at about the time that Marlene and I have been married, 25 to 30 years. And that spike is driven, most marriage and family experts believe, primarily by one simple thing. The kids left the house. And suddenly, as all of the little munchkins ran off, there was no longer a focus, and the two turned to look at each other and discovered, you know what? That really does bug me. But I've been so busy playing chauffeur and soccer mom or being the dad at the Little League games that I didn't have time to focus on the fact that that really does irritate me. And then we wind up fighting with each other. Well, it's a very simple fact that the Bible gives very little marriage advice. Honestly. We have well-worn verses that we've gone over again and again and again. And they're really kind of sparse. Because the advice given on marriage in these is things like, love and respect him, and you love and be sensitive with her. And you're like, is that all I'm getting here? Don't I get more details on that? I mean, where's the advice on fighting is don't go to bed angry. Well, there's a great big piece of input right there, isn't it? But the Bible does teach us that as men and women who are committed disciples of Jesus, our focus ought to be on seeking first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. However, over the course of the last number of years, in our fellowship, sometimes we've moved a bit away from that focus. And we've made, maybe in our lives, comfort and preparing for our future as the focus. We would like to ask that each of you get yourself a copy of this book. I believe you can buy it in an ebook format, is that right?
Actually, you get a free WhatsApp. You get a free app.
You can get a free app. You can download it, either an Android or iPhone. Is that right? So you can get the book on an app, and it'll just lead you through on a weekly basis, and then you don't have to pay any money for it, which is that's a cool thing. So there, you're saving money for your future. We got the hard copy, and then Marlene got me the one on CD because I spent a lot of time driving, and my commute is about an hour, and that way I get to listen to it.
Sorry.
I'm so sorry. You and Me Forever by Francis Chan and Lisa Chan. This is the guy who wrote that book, Crazy Love. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a very good book. He is a minister in Northern California now of significant YouTube fame. So if you go watch his lessons, he's really got some great lessons. And moreover, a biblical conviction on the topic of baptism, which makes me like him even more. All right. And he's got my haircut. So what else could I ask for? Okay. I'd like to show you a little video for us to start off with that I just have to tell you that when my wife and I watched this video, we just cried. We cried because the most difficult things that have happened in our life and the most rewarding have focused around what this is going to talk about. So let's start off with this. This is 13 minutes long, and we're going to share a few thoughts, and we'll be done for tonight.
When we first started talking about getting married, Nigel mentioned, what if we have a really big wedding and invite all of our neighbors?
We live in a neighborhood of 400 by 400 yards, and in that area are 4 25-story high-rise buildings. And in those buildings are 4,000 people.
As we kept talking, we realized a lot of our neighbors don't have cars. A lot of our neighbors would never step foot in a church building. And realistically, the only way they could come to our wedding is if the wedding came to them.
We were driving home from church and we had just heard a great sermon on the book of James. And then on the ride home, Sharon said, we ought to really do something that matters.
And I thought she was going to suggest we work at a soup kitchen or maybe do something on Saturday afternoons to help people. And instead, she introduced the idea of adoption.
We saw a picture in a newsletter of George. The ad said that he was healthy, but was born with no arms and desperately needed a loving home. And I really felt that God was speaking to me and saying, I want you to adopt this boy. I have a plan for this boy to be in your family. And I was actually afraid to even mention it to Mike because it was such a departure from anything we'd ever done.
When I was in control, I drank everything away. I drank away my marriage, I drank away my children, I drank away my relationships. My life basically caved in and crashed in around me.
Our marriage was at a bad place. I knew that I couldn't move forward with the way things were going. And I made a decision to file for divorce.
Should we go out there or out here? Let's go out here because we're going to show you the wedding site and everything. Folks don't normally have a wedding next to something like this, and it isn't always this bad, but as you can see, there's a bit of garbage strewn around today, but it really worked out well on our wedding day.
This is where we said I do, and we had all of the chairs right here and our neighbors, and you can see the buildings, and the whole neighborhood could hear our wedding, and a lot of people came down and joined the party when they heard songs and prayers in their languages.
Because we wanted to include as many people as we could in our wedding, we actually ended up deciding to have 2 wedding ceremonies and 2 3-hour receptions in one day.
I think as we make our major life decisions about who we'll marry, what our career will be, where we'll live, how we'll spend our time, I think we all have defaults in our life that kind of dictate or guide us in these decisions. As we were planning our wedding, there's so many cultural defaults that may not necessarily be bad or good, but they just are handed to us. And I really felt God speak to me to challenge how I would do our wedding and how we would live our lives, that our new defaults would be what would glorify God most.
To paraphrase 2 Corinthians 8 verse 9, Christ, who is rich, became poor so that we, through his poverty, could become rich. And as Jesse and I were getting married, we wanted our lives to reflect this verse, to intentionally become poor in some way by moving into a high-needs neighborhood. And it has certainly enriched our lives.
Before we got married, people told us that we should maybe not live in our neighborhood for our first year of marriage, that we should take it easy and really build into our marriage. And we really felt strongly that we should stay in our neighborhood and that we should start our marriage by serving God together, because that's what we wanted our whole lives to look like. There's something powerful about seeking first God's kingdom with your spouse that makes your love go deeper and stronger than if you were just seeking first your marriage.
There you go.
We got George home and things started to go fairly well and he got healthy and happy. And I thought, okay, we've done our deal. This is our grand contribution to the kingdom. God should be very happy with us now. And I went by the computer one night and Sharon was sitting there looking at the internet. And she had found James and it said boy born in India with no arms. And Sharon had the idea, why don't we make them brothers? Wouldn't that be amazing?
And serving God really takes a lot of submission and it takes a lot of sort of repetitious, unglamorous kind of work. I think people can look at our family and see
12 vivacious kids and think, wow, this, what a beautiful thing. But that involved years and years of doing the same thing over and over again. You have to be willing to kind of make yourself nothing sometime, and then he blesses those efforts, and in the end, he makes it into something beautiful.
With Sharon and I think it's that we actually don't focus on our marriage that makes it a great one. And Satan sometimes whispers in your ear when you're tired or alone or 3 in the morning and says, your friends are going to Jamaica next week. And they're just going to sit on the beach and stare into each other's eyes. And we don't ever get to do stuff like that. And you're like, what have I done to myself? And then you have other moments where you go right to the tip of the mountain and you realize it's going to have effects for eternity.
I think this adopted mission we're on has been the best thing for our marriage, because I see people that have been married as long as us struggling to find common ground and find common interests and stay interested in each other. And I feel like we have this big God adventure that we're on together, and that's the most romantic thing you could be doing.
There's 140 million orphans around the world, and how can we just use our marriage to just ignore that whole worldwide problem? I don't know how you're going to face God at the end and say, oh, you put us together and you found us and you made us, and what we decided to do with our marriage was get comfortable.
The day that Susan threw me out of the house was a day that literally saved my life. And what transpired from that night was a series of events that only God could orchestrate.
When I was working, there were Christian people around me, and they seemed like they had good relationships with their families, and that was really what I wanted.
My wife started taking our kids to a church and thinking she's sending them to a cult, and so I decided I'm going to go visit church with them. That morning, God got my attention in a really big way, and we ended up giving my life to Christ. God restored my marriage. My ex-wife and I were remarried. We became best friends, but something important changed. Our marriage wasn't just about each other and our children and our home and our dreams, but it also included helping other people in any way that we could. That's where our heart for missions really started, and that's how Crisis Saved was born.
Right now we're in East Africa. This is little Thomas Kid. He's 4 years old. As you can see, he's severely malnourished.
Crisis Aid is now building a children's clinic in an area that has no doctor. We're starting another building program for our girls who are victims of sex trafficking, as well as looking at the United States, our inner city work. We want to expand that significantly.
We're headed to the center. Our mission is really to reach the lost. We provide packages of food that include groceries, canned goods, meat, vegetables, and bread, just depending on what's available.
I love standing back in a corner and watching her. She glows. Just to see the life of God come out of her. And you can see it in her face and her expression, and even if she limps with her cane, there's a difference, you know. She's more beautiful to me today than the day we got married, the second time. Had we been living our own life, you know, trying to build a good life for ourselves, we wouldn't have that experience. We would be missing that.
We know that restoration is possible, and it's exciting to see what God's going to do and how He's going to use it after all of these years, you know, because it's been a while now.
Well, I've never been busier in my entire life, and I'm supposed to be retired. We don't see any reason to slow down. But you know, when you're on a mission, when God puts this thing in your heart and you really find it, it's not work. I mean, it's a privilege. If married people want to know how to be missional, There's about 3,000 verses in the Bible that deal with poverty and injustice. Pick one and build your life around it. You'll be in the center of God's will.
I think a common way that people view relationships and marriage is finding someone that you can spend time with, that you can do fun things with, you can have a family, you can buy a home. I just felt like marriage could have a much stronger, more powerful, more significant meaning than just someone who I could grow old with.
I think one thing about marriage is that it doubles what you individually desire. If you individually desire to settle down, then you'll doubly settle down. But if you individually desire to be on mission, then you'll doubly be able to do that. And seeking first the kingdom, doing hard things, even suffering.
God is pleased with a marriage that doesn't dwell and consume itself and get caught up in its own roots and vines, but is seeking to reach out to the world around it and have an actual lasting impact for His kingdom.
Second Peter chapter 3 says, "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. Then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved. And the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be? Living lives of holiness and godliness, waiting for and hastening the coming of the day of God, because which the heavens will be set on fire and dissolved, and the heavenly bodies will melt as they burn." I was personally sobered. How do I say yes? Here we go. Oh, well. It will go away in a moment, I'm sure. I was personally very humbled as I watched this. I look at my life, and I look at our life in our marriage, and we've gone through some bumpy times together, as every couple in this room has. And we still go through bumpy times. I often don't understand myself. I don't understand my character. I don't understand why I struggle sin-wise with the things I struggle with. Even this week, it was a tough week for me on the road spiritually, and I felt like, wow, I don't even feel like getting up and teaching. I spoke last Sunday in Phnom Penh. I didn't feel like preaching in Phnom Penh. I had to just kind of poke myself a few times to get myself going. And I feel often like I spend a big chunk of my life focused on chasing a career. I have a pretty high stress job with a lot of responsibility, as I know most of you do at one level or another. And I think to myself often, what do I do what I do for? Why am I doing this? What is the goal of my existence? And I want to live a responsible life like all of you do. And as couples, we want to live responsible lives. We want to save enough money for retirement. We want to have a nice home to live in. We want to give our kids every opportunity. We want them to go to great schools. All of these things I do not believe are wrong. I believe God has given us a responsibility, even as husbands, to lead our families and to care for them. He says if we don't do that, we're worse than an unbeliever. And yet, I often ask myself, why do I do what I do? Why do I go where I go? Why do I chase the things that I chase in life? As my brother always has said to me, Jim, it's all scheduled to burn. You usually don't wash paper plates because they're disposable. You're not trying to save them. And yet we spend an extraordinary part of our life trying to prepare for the last 10 or 20 years of it, while often giving less attention to the eternity that will follow that. And as a result, our marriages become very focused, myopically focused on preparing for this little chunk of time. Marlene and I took a trip for our 20th anniversary. And I had figured out a reason that I felt like was spiritual, that we should go on a cruise in the Mediterranean. And I said, I'll invest in a business trip. Why shouldn't I invest in my marriage? And so we got on this cruise ship in Rome. And it was a spiritual trip because this one followed the missionary travels of Paul. Wow. And I thought, hey, cool. Nobody else on the boat actually realized it was that. It wasn't one of these church-sponsored cruises. And the first night, you're supposed to. We've never been on a cruise before, and I might add, we probably won't ever go on another one. And you're supposed to dress up. So we dressed up, and we went down to the big, huge restaurant area, and we're supposed to sit at a table with another couple. And fortunately, the other couple didn't show up. And we sat down at the table together, and we were all gussied up there, and we're heading down the Amalfi Coast on Italy. And we said, boy, this is beautiful. And we looked around at table after table after table of 50 and 60 and maybe even 70-something-year-old couples who were all there, and they were on the cruise. And this is it. This is, you work all your life so that you can get to go do something fun like this. And I sat there and I looked at Marlene, and I got tears in my eyes. And I told her, I said, sweetie, if this is what we are headed for, I don't want any part of it whatsoever. And I said, I've spent 8 years now absolutely killing myself on business and career. And I said, I started a business for the purpose of advancing God's kingdom, but I can't really say that's what I'm doing right now. And we decided on that trip to move to China. That time in China and in Asia, Marlene will share more about it, was just brutally difficult for us. As we tried to live out what these nice people here on the screen seem to be pulling off with very little effort. It's tougher than that, I can tell you. They made it look easy, all right? But I said, we're going to make our mission our focus. And I have to tell you that sometimes I do a better and sometimes I do a worse job of that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm convinced to the core of my being that our focus in our marriage ought to be not preparing for what we just read that Peter wrote to the Christians in the first century is scheduled to go. But instead living lives of sacrifice. That doesn't mean we climb on a plane and fly halfway around the world. Not everybody needs to have an IQ as low as mine, all right? But it does mean that we find a spiritual mission for our marriage and for our life wherever it is that we are. And that becomes the focus of who we are as individuals. When we make our relationship with God our focus and serving Him, things become very different. I'll share with you before Marlene comes up and shares. There was a couple in Charlotte that were in our ministry, and every week we'd get together for discipling time, and every week it was another knockdown, drag-out fracas that they'd been involved in. And these guys had a gift. they had a gift. They could fight about anything. I mean, they were just, I just thought they just liked fighting. There are some couples like that. You've met them, haven't you? Maybe you're one of them. You just like a good old fight every now and again. It kind of clears your sinuses, so to speak. And we sat down for D time that week, and I finally looked at him and I said, you know what, I'm done here. I said, I've had enough of playing the guy with the striped shirt who gets to play referee between you two, fighting all the time. And I stopped, I said, how many quiet times did you have this week? And I pointed to the guy right in his face. Kind of shuffled a little bit, and, well, really, not really a lot. I said, how about you? And she said, not that many. I said, I will not have another time with you to discuss your marriage until it comes on the heels of 7 days of quiet times that each of you have had. They came back next week, they were happy as clams, and there had been no fights that week. I thought, gosh, I'm a genius in the ministry now, aren't I, right? The fact of the matter was, they just needed to get their focus off of each other and get it back on God. It was no brilliant advice on my part. It's just what we needed. I'm no different. I struggle with it to this day. I get on the road. I just came off of a ridiculous little 14-day jaunt, 6 cities, 4 countries, and 7 hotels. I think to myself, and I had a rough time spiritually. And you know what? I didn't schedule enough time to spend with God. And my wife got me on the phone and she said, Jim, when are you going to figure this out? It wasn't a fight, it was just a good little shot to the side of the head. She said, you continue to get in this cycle. You get super busy with work, and I'm thinking in my head, yeah, but I'm negotiating this big deal, and I've almost got it there. These Japanese guys they're gonna fold. It's great. Well, it doesn't do much good if you don't do well spiritually, does it? We need focus on God. I desperately need it. This is really good for me, this class. Not because I get to teach you, because it reminds me not to be a spiritual knucklehead and focus on me.
Marriage prepares my heart to be like Jesus. And it doesn't come naturally. And I'm really delighted to actually be with all of you and this time. Jim is my best friend, and he helps me tremendously see who I really am. Because honestly, guys, I can be a good Pharisee. I can go through the motions, I can go through it, but Jim has a way of getting to my heart, of what's really inside. Helps me to figure out, well, I really am just, I am lying about this, or I am angry at it. Like, he helps me get to the root of my issues. And so I'm very grateful for that relationship that helps me get to God, gets me centered to God to figure out who I am and what I need to change. I remember in the last 25 years, and I remember the first year of our marriage, and we had a great first year. We had a lot of fun, but at the end of the first year, he said, and he didn't even say this angrily. I just remember him saying, Marlene, I think you have an issue with God and how God designed marriage. And I thought, well, I didn't really want to believe him, but I thought, you know what? I really did. I did not. I was fighting to have my own way. I didn't want to submit. I actually thought it should be 50-50 the whole way, I didn't want that. But my issue was not with him. It was with God. His design, his plan. I remember my 7th year of marriage. And these are just a few memories, At that point, we actually were always we were best friends. But you know how things they didn't turn out the way you wanted or the way you thought. And so bitterness and resentments kind of grew in my heart. And I couldn't have children, which I had longed for since I was about, 9 years old. And so the sadness and all of that. And I remember getting really, really angry and really, really hurt. But it ultimately was I had to surrender to God. Now, I took it out in my marriage, but my issue was not with him. It was with my God. I remember the 15th year of marriage. You know, around that time we had children, young children. We had a change in career. I lost faith. We had just moved to Denver. I remember working, I was a director of a school, working about 60 hours a week. I had I think a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old at that time. Jim was traveling and working hard. And I just thought, I remember sitting on the couch thinking, if somebody knocked on my door right now to ask me to study the Bible, I would say, no thank you. I'd shut the door. I just wasn't there. You know, I wasn't, my heart, I had lost my first love. And a lot of things came out in the marriage, but it really wasn't about the marriage. It was because me and my heart with God had grown apart. And then I was very thankful that he helped me, Jim helped me get back in the scriptures and change. And then I remember the 20th, our 20th year anniversary that he just shared about. We were sitting in there, and I remember we were really in the middle of this dining hall and all dressed up, just like he said, on this ship. And you know, you get all excited and you buy clothes for the ship and you get there. And then he shared that about the change, and I thought, well, am I willing to give it up? Am I willing to surrender again, just like I was a new Christian? Am I willing to do that again? And I remember fighting on my knees, praying, God, I want to get that heart again. And I remember saying, God, if you want me to go, I will go. I will do anything you want me to, God, because it's your life. It's not mine. And I remember the surrender, the fight to get back to God and what he wants from me. And that time was so good. And I remember that it felt like I was on a train. And then, you know, God just said, this is the way you're going to go. Hurry up. She said yes. And, you know, let's get her out of here. That's kind of how I felt. Like, get on a train. She might say no again. And then I remember, you know, even in Asia, that was the hardest time in my entire life, the last 4 years. But it was the absolute best time of my life, the last 4 years. Because I had to deal with Almighty God on my knees day and night to be close to him, to see miracles happen after miracle, and people's lives changed. And it was worth it. My kids were able to do that and see that and fight through things. My decision to follow Jesus is the ultimate marriage helper. Bar none. There's nothing else that works. The books are great. This is why I really appreciate this book. And guiding it, even reading it myself over and over, because it really is the truth. We have lots of things we can learn, communication, do's and don'ts, love language, but ultimately, me on my knees before my Lord, dealing with my heart and my sin, and listening to the Word of God and changing is the best thing that helps in my marriage. So when I focus on my needs and my desires, I get discontent, greedy, selfish, and argumentative. And so my only hope for the marriage, and I am delighted to be married to my best friend of 25 years in just a few hours, is me and my relationship with God.
So clearly Marlene is the better-hearted one in the family. I think the challenge for all of us is to realize this, is that the purpose of your relationship with your spouse is to help them get to heaven, first and foremost. Now that sounds obvious, but the fact of the matter is I don't think that we really believe that, because I think most of us think that the purpose of our relationship is to be happy. And I will tell you that's dead wrong. And if you make that the focus of your relationship, I guarantee you, you won't be happy. Yeah. Because just like the baby staring at the finger, you're missing what it's supposed to point you at. And when you focus on God, you become at peace and you become happy. And so I'd like for us to have a little time. We're not going to do it while we're here, although, what time are we supposed to end? 8 o'clock?
8:15.
8:15. Woohoo! We're set. We're ahead of schedule. We've saved a little bit of chronological money here, okay? So what we're going to do is we will have a little time alone with our spouse, okay? That sounded dangerous already, didn't it? Right there, that sounded dangerous. Marlene and I came back from the marriage retreat in Vail. We had the most humdinger argument we have had in probably 20 years.
All the way down the mountain.
It started in Dillon, went all the way to Greenwood Village. And then we sat in the parking lot at our building and went for another 15 minutes. And finally we said, it's hot in here. Let's go inside and fight. And so we went inside. We got in, we sat on the couch. And you know how the argument ended? We just looked at each other and we just started laughing because we couldn't remember what we were arguing about anymore. Have you been in that situation? All right, I just want to make sure I wasn't weird, all right? Okay, whew, we all feel better. So, a little advice for us as we get ready to talk. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this, James 1:19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Any of you who listens to the word but does not do it, what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after getting up, or after looking at himself, goes away and forgets what he looks like. Now then, I think one of the biggest challenges that all of us face spiritually is that the longer you and I go knowing there's something we should do in our life and we don't do it, what we're doing is on a daily basis we're actually hardening ourselves toward that issue. And the longer we go, the less likely we are to actually ever do it. Because we get less and less and less motivated, because we get better and better and better at squashing the Holy Spirit's prompting and deciding, mañana, 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 I will do it tomorrow. The time is not right. So, I'd like to ask us to do a little something as we break off here into our respective pairs. I'd like for you to have a very honest discussion with each other about, first of all, what is the true focus of your marriage right now? That's a tough one. That's probably not a 5-minute conversation. You're not going to come up with, a clever idea. I really just want us to start the conversation and ask ourselves, because it's going to take the course of this entire, however many weeks, 8 weeks, for us to be able to figure out. That's not one that you just go, oh, I got it written on a little card in my wallet here. You don't. But to very honestly look at each other and say, what are we really focused on? Mm-hmm. But then I want you to ask a second question that will be equally as challenging, I think, for all of us to wrestle with and grasp. But that is this. What, and this will be the theme of what we wrestle through for the whole 8 weeks together. What can we make as a focus outside of our relationship spiritually for us to aim at. It may not be as exotic as adopting special needs kids from halfway around the world, or moving off into the mission field, or those are real exotic sounding, high profile things. It may be quite simple in nature, but we desperately need a spiritual focus in our marriage, that we say, this is what we are aiming to do outside of ourselves. Outside of ourselves. And so I want us to really wrestle with that, but I want you to first ask yourself, genuinely right now, what is the primary focus of our marriage? Let me help you a little bit with what will help you answer that question. What do you spend the most time fighting about? We fight over the things that are the most important to us. It's as simple as that. Someone's Android alarm is going off. That's my alarm to wake me up in the mornings right there. We fight about the things that we care about the most. James said it. Where do fights and quarrels come from among you? He says, from your desires. What you desire. Marlene and I have not spent even 2 seconds discussing or fussing over the Stanley Cup playoffs. In fact, I can assure you that she does not actually know who Sidney Crosby is. And she has no idea that the playoffs just ended and that someone won the Stanley Cup. It's this town that starts with a P, honey, and it's not Phoenix, okay? Because we just really, honestly, I'm sorry to say if you're a hockey fan, but we don't care about hockey. We just don't. It's just not something that's really a big topic to us, okay? Well, we spent plenty of time fussing over other stuff because we care deeply about it. So, as you have your little conversation, that will help direct you. And it's always great to be able to discuss the things that there are conflicts about outside of a conflict. It forces you to be a little less emotional, somewhat more dispassionate and logical and rational about it, which are words that usually don't enter into our relationships, do they? At least one of us believes that the other one struggles with this, and usually we both do. So, let's work on that together. Amen? Amen. What I'd like to do is, before we break off to go do this, I'd like for us to have just a moment where we take out a second to pray about our marriages and our focus. And I'd like to ask Chris Jacobs, if he would, just to pray and ask God to bless not just this conversation tonight, but the next 8 weeks as we begin to wrestle through and ask ourselves these questions. Thanks.
Amen. Pray. Our God and our Father, thank you so much for the thoughts that were presented tonight. Father, we know that it really is your desire for us to seek first your kingdom. Father, we do pray that you would help each of us to be directed and to know what that is for our relationship. Father, we know that you've given each one of us special gifts and abilities, and as Jim and Marlene were talking about, we don't want to waste it fighting with one another. Rather, we want to serve you and to serve other people in the ways that you want us to. Please direct our time, not just tonight, but throughout the next 8 weeks. And Father, I pray that this class would have just an incredible impact, Father, whether we already have a very strong marriage or we're really struggling. Father, we know that all of us need to grow and become more and more like you. We thank you so much, Father. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. So let's take the next 10 minutes or so here to begin a framework for the conversation that we're going to have over the course of the next 8 weeks, okay? Thank you so much for all of you coming. Very encouraging to see each of you here tonight.
Thank you.